Rita Moreno in West Side Story.
Rita Moreno, she won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role in West Side Story, and she's had the rare honor of winning 2 Emmys, a Tony, and a Grammy Award. She just learned she'll receive the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Screen Actors Guild. I talked to her about her legendary career and her New York Times bestseller. You got personal in this book.
It's called a life story, you know. Don't most memoirs get personal? Are you saying that people stint on information?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think there were parts of the book where you admitted that it wasn't until you wrote the book that you were able to come out with certain things, dealing with your relationship with Marlon Brando, some of the stereotyping that you experienced in your career. Why was it so important to bring out those very personal messages?
To begin with, it's important because nobody, as you said, you had no idea. Who'd have thunk? But more important is that my book covers a part of Hollywood that no longer exists. And this was a time when racism was really pretty blatant. It's not that anyone went around calling each other names, just the fact that you were Hispanic and a woman and had breasts right away put you into a certain kind of spitfire, kind of easy to be had kind of category. That certainly really doesn't exist anymore. There will always be bias. I mean, anyone who thinks they're going to get rid of that is not thinking properly. However, it is nowhere near as blatant as it was then. And as I tend to say with respect to the Hispanic situation in films and television, the door is ajar. It was closed, it was locked with several keys when I was a young woman in Hollywood.
You really had this resistance to being constantly typecast.
I resisted it, but on the other hand, I had to make a living. I had to buy food, I had to pay the rent. So my thinking was, I will do this as long as I have to until somebody discovers that I actually have talent and that I don't just have to flash my little bare shoulders around and, you know, shake my little hoop earrings. And it took a very long time, actually. But, you know, my middle name is Perseverance. I will fall down and get up, and the idea is to keep moving.
It was Louis B. Mayer of MGM who's credited for discovering you.
Yes, well, actually, his talent scout found me at a dance school recital when I was, I think I was 16 years old. And he came backstage and showed my mother his card, Dudley Wilkinson, a name I will never forget. And he gave my mother his card, and he said, the time isn't right now, but when it's right, I will call you, and we'll have Rosita meet Mr. Louis B. Mayer sometime. So about 6 months later, he called.
And he called.
L.B. Mayer was in town, and we were asked to meet him at the WALDORF Astoria Hotel in the Penthouse. Number one, we didn't know what a WALDORF Astoria was. When you're in the ghetto, you don't get out of the ghetto very much, right?
Right.
And hotels, whoever went to hotels for tea or something? No. We went there, we went to the lobby, we went to the man at the counter who said, yes. We said, Mr. Mayer. My mother said, Mr. Mayer is expecting us. And they said, take the elevator. We get in the elevator. We don't know what button to hit. We don't see a button that makes any sense. So we get out of the elevator, go back to the counter, and the man says, oh, PH, penthouse. And we went up, and the elevator door opened into his suite, which was, of course, magnificent. And there's the Wizard of Oz, because, you know, that film was done there at MGM. But more than that, they were the studio that made all of the great musicals. That was the studio that had Gene Kelly and Judy Garland and Ann Miller, all these fabulous people. And when he took one look at me, I was trying very, very hard in those times to emulate Elizabeth Taylor, because there were no role models for me. Who was there? I had my waist cinture on to look like her. I had the hair down perfectly, the eyebrows. Of course, those incredible purple blue eyes were not anywhere to be seen on me. But he actually looked at me, talked to me for a few minutes, and he said to the talent scout, Why, she looks like a Spanish Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I floated out of there because very soon thereafter he said, let's sign her up. And in those days you could do that. You could say, the worst that could happen is that I was a tax deduction.
It must have, at that time, to be that young and to walk in.
Oh, I know what you're going to ask. I know what you're going to ask. It was astonishing. Think a kid from the ghetto walking through the MGM gates, huge, beautiful wrought iron gates, going to see the person who's already assigned her to a movie. His name was Joe Pasternak. He was the second highest producer at MGM. The biggest one was Arthur Freed. And I met Mr. Joe Pasternak, and he was very sweet. He put his arm around me. He said, come on, kid, I'll show you around the MGM lot. And again, keep thinking, this little Puerto Rican girl's going, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And the first person he introduces me to is Clark Gable. I mean, heart attackville.
You came into that experience after having a pretty disorienting childhood.
Well, disorienting in the sense that I was born in Puerto Rico, and I lived in Puerto Rico till I was 5 years old. My mother made a huge life-changing decision. Number one, she divorced my father, who was a philanderer. Not unusual, particularly in those times. And that's already was amazing because it's a Catholic island, and you didn't do that. And she was very, very young. I mean, she could not have been more than, I'm saying 20, something like that. And she left me after the divorce with my father and my little brother, Francisco, took a boat to New York City, not knowing a word of English. Talk about courage and vision. She got a job in a sweatshop in Manhattan. She stayed with an aunt in an apartment with other families. She made enough, when she made enough money and had learned just a little bit more English, she went right back to Puerto Rico and retrieved me and brought me back to the United States. But to answer your question the long way around, it was confusing because I couldn't understand why we would leave that paradise, which it was for me. I was not happy to have left that beautiful, beautiful little green island.
And your brother?
My little brother Francisco was left behind. Her intent was to bring him at a later time, but it never happened. Somehow or other, it just never happened.
And you never got to see him after
Never got to see him again. He was a skinny, dark little boy. He was almost your coloring. I was the Spaniard in the group. My grandma was a Spaniard, and she was quite fair and didn't look at all exotic. She looked just like, she could have been an American. I have people all colors in my family.
For me, it was very special to read that you were standing 10 feet away
from Martin
Luther King at the I Have a Dream speech.
10 feet away during the I Have a Dream speech.
I have a dream.
Unbelievable.
Tell me.
I mean, I could see every drop of sweat because it was a sweltering day in D.C. that day. And in back of us at the pool were thousands and thousands of people, many of them wearing the uniform of that particular campaign, which was the coveralls, usually with one shoulder. It was, I get goosebumps just thinking about it today. He was right there, just about where this camera is.
Did you know at that time the significance of that moment?
Oh, absolutely, we all did. And we, when I say we were a group of artists from Hollywood that Harry Belafonte put together. Harry wanted very much for Dr. King and everyone else to know that there were people there who really did care. And he deliberately picked all kinds. Some were directors, some were writers. A number of them were actors, performers. Sammy Davis, I was sitting next to Diane Carroll, and we were all sitting there sweltering and just cheering our throats out raw.
People knew that that would be a moment that could advance the interests of black people in America, but there was very little said at that time about the Hispanic agenda.
Well, one at a time.
It hadn't been defined yet.
No, it hadn't been defined because, for one thing, You know, Cesar Chavez didn't come till much, much later. And that was essentially about the Mexican farm workers. So we never really had our Martin Luther King. That we came to it a bit late, I'm afraid.
Did you feel at that time, though, that you, in the position that you were in, could be an advocate for Hispanics, or any responsibility or even pressure that
No,
that
absolutely,
you may
I
have
did. I did, because just about that time I started to get very involved in politics, local politics in Los Angeles. I did one of the very earliest anti-nuclear bomb demonstrations. I had heard, along with many other people in Los Angeles, that the places where cows were feeding, the grass was tainted with strontium-90, a toxic chemical that got into the milk of the cows, therefore got into the milk of the babies that drank it. And that bothered a lot of us a lot. And that's how I got involved, actually, in anything that was even nominally political.
What do you think of some of the younger Latina actresses that are prominent today that have come behind you? And have you heard from anyone
No.
to say, hey, I just want to call to say thank you as a mentor?
No. A number of times Jennifer Lopez has actually brought me up in a very complimentary way as an inspiration. And, you know, I think Rosie Perez. But on the whole, people don't do that. I think I would. I'd be so happy that someone else had to suffer that much and not me. But
Well,
you know, these same people would also say, hey, I suffered plenty, thank you very much. Just because it's 2009 doesn't mean that I haven't also suffered. I know they have. But it's nowhere near, in terms of the profession, not life, the profession, it's nowhere near as difficult as it was. Nowhere near.
You address stereotyping and racism and also some of the sexism in Hollywood that you experience.
Well, you know, the assumption that because you were Latina, you were sexy and easy. I was always, I mean, I lived with that from the time I was 16 in films.
And you were very candid and revealing about some of your relationships that you had with very famous and powerful men. Marlon Brando, Elvis Presley. One of the things about Marlon Brando, it's in the public record, a very wounded person.
Yes, he was a very damaged person.
Yeah.
And I wasn't exactly unwounded either. And you know, these two obsessives came together and just exploded. We were really addicted to each other. And you know, addictions are very, very difficult to get rid of. Very.
It was an 8-year relationship. He married 2 other women in the course of that relationship, fathered children with them.
Yep.
What was it that made you stay?
I loved him. You know, it's obsessive love, which is a whole nother thing. I mean, we need another half hour for that one.
But
With the presence of a psychiatrist.
the common theme through all of this is that these men were drawn to you. When men achieve that level of fame and wealth, what are their biggest insecurities or problems that keep them from total happiness?
Well, I don't think Marlon ever got to trust women. I don't know enough about Elvis really to make any kind of supposition. But I know that Marlon was a horribly damaged person by the time I met him. His mother was an alcoholic, his father drank, and you know, she disappointed him constantly over and over and over. So he kept either punishing women for having the capacity to do that to men, and he kept punishing himself by finding women who were very often not reliable. Interesting, yes?
And yes, indeed, and tragic in the sense that it even drove you to attempt suicide while you were with him.
It did. It was my way, twisted and sick as it was, to try to end that kind of humiliation and pain. I just didn't know how else to do it because I kept going back to him.
Did you at the time, when you're hanging out with people like Leonard Bernstein and 10 feet away from Martin Luther King and all of these people that, of course, went down to be iconic in the same way that you did Did you know at that time that you were making history or that you were a part of it? I know you said you were with I Have a Dream.
Well,
but
with
what
I Have a
about
Dream, yes.
in the making of West Side
No,
Story?
no, not at all. You know, it was a film that didn't have any sequins on the costumes, and people were singing high operatic voices, and I thought it was a brilliant film. But are people going to pay $5 to see a movie where there's no sequins and people are singing these weird voices, and the guys who are supposed to be gangs are singing, doing balletic steps? Who knew? I thought nobody's going to show up. P.S. It has celebrated its 50th, is it?
And you don't even remember because you're not caught up in all of that, are you?
No.
One final question. What is it going to take for Hollywood to change in a significant way to the point that those roles will be available?
I think it has to take the perseverance of the actors and actresses who are in a position to speak up. I think it's going to take people like Morgan Freeman and Cosby and any number of huge black film stars, for instance, to produce films. What I think is very important is that they mustn't be just black films, because then we're ghettoizing ourselves. That would be, I think, a mistake.
Is it hard to get on the ownership side, to get penetration into the green lighting?
It took Oliver Stone 12 years to sell 4th of July, the movie, which of course went on to be a huge and enormous hit. That's Oliver Stone, and he's white. So it's a tough business.
So it will change at some point. You just don't know how long.
I'm probably not going to be around. I'd like to be. I'd like to see that. Fly on the wall.
Well, even if you aren't, you've done so much to contribute to it happening through this book.
It's great to meet you.
Amazing story. Congratulations on a New York Times bestseller.
Thank you.
And,
you can hold it up.
And with Rita Moreno, I'm Lee Hawkins. We'll see you next time.
And I was willing to do whatever I needed to do within my moral confines to be on TV, including wear my hair the way they wanted me to, wear flat front khakis and loafers. And you know I'm not a flat front khaki loafer girl.
A long time ago, a mafia friend of mine said, "Don't look to the right, don't look to the left, run your own race." And it was a great piece of advice. So I don't know why they're coming to see me. I guess maybe because I live in the moment.